Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. Today we're going to be talking about food and great food choices and delicious food choices. I want to start, though, by thanking Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which is a sponsor of Something to Talk About. They offer assisted independent living and memory care up on Rolling Bay. They have a lovely campus up there. And you can find out more by calling them 206-594-1010. Check out their website at Fieldstone Communities or come by for a tour. They also offer respite and day stay programs. And the other thing that's going on right now is that they are offering free lunches. So if you are interested in taking a tour and checking out their restaurant, bar, and grill. This is kind of funny because we're going to be talking about restaurants in a little bit, but maybe you can ask them what the ingredients are. You can call Ashley Campoy to book lunch, 206-649-3121. I'm having some numerical challenges today. 206-649-3121. So Suzanne Granstrom is here with us today, and Ann Lovejoy as well, and we're going to talk a little bit about keying off on the idea of Cinco de Mayo, um, looking at diets, and we were talking before we started about how traditional Mexican diets, like many indigenous diets around the world, are not dependent on meat, very much the opposite. Very interested in vegetables and fruits as the way to sort of focus the diet, and meat is kind of a special add-on rather than the centerpiece. And that kind of gets to the idea of eating more healthily and the idea of looking beyond salt and sugar as ways to enhance the flavor of the food you eat. So thank you, Suzanne, for again agreeing to come here and talk with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here again.
Actually, Suzanne, for the people who are watching this later, which is usually quite a few, could you just introduce yourself a little bit, like how you would like to be, what is your background? Tell us why you're
Sure.
so interested in good food.
I will. Yes, absolutely. I'm a registered nurse. I'm actually still licensed. I'm at a place where I'm kind of thinking maybe I could let my license go, but I've had it for over 50 years and I'm kind of hesitant to give it up. So I'm a registered nurse. I have a lot of diverse experience. I've been a dialysis nurse, many different kinds of critical care nursing positions. And I've always been interested in nutrition. I learned pretty early on that watching patients who were suffering, that the American diet, even 50 years ago, wasn't actually serving them in terms of good health. And so for about 20 years, when I lived in California, I facilitated some quit smoking programs and helped people quit smoking. And about 4 years ago now, I really became interested in nutrition, in part because I have had two siblings who had terrible dementia. My brother actually just passed away last month, and and I wanted to figure out why I was healthier than my younger sister, for example, and was food part of it? Because I'd been eating as a vegan, I was a vegetarian, a pescatarian. I've tried all different ways of eating, but always with lots of veggies. So I studied functional nutrition, and now I'm just very interested in sharing what I know and helping people kind of understand how important the food that we put in our mouth is to our well-being. So that's my history.
Well, as a gardener, of course, I am always interested in hearing more about plant-based diets because, I mean, I'm someone who eats kale pretty much every single day, for instance, and all year round, right? Or,
Mhm.
the things that fresh herbs and the kind of nursing stuff through the winter, all the kale family, of course, has lots of winter hardy lettuces and things like that. Because it seems like part of it for me is like if I eat something fresh every day, I just feel healthier. And for me, fresh does not necessarily mean I got it at the store. Because sometimes those things aren't as fresh as we think, right?
I think that's true. And actually, somewhat inspired by you and your book, and the opportunity to start a new garden again. I have moved to a new home and I
Oh,
have a brand new garden, and I'm planting an entire bed of nothing but salad greens. And I have herbs started, and it's one of the things I'm hoping to talk about a little bit today is how using fresh herbs can make all the difference in how your food tastes.
oh,
And they're good for
absolutely.
us.
And that's sort of a good segue into we started thinking about Cinco de Mayo as a takeoff point, because for so many people, Cinco de Mayo means like chips and salsa, frozen margaritas, maybe, or something like that,
Mhm.
tacos, or God knows, like those fried thing, uh, there's there's a lot of things that people eat in America thinking they're celebrating a holiday in Mexico that actually isn't even that popular in Mexico. But where it is, the things that are being eaten are quite different to what we think of in terms of celebrating that. And I'd sort of love to look at it kind of a celebration of Mexican cooking in the most healthy possible ways. That's something you've looked
Absolutely.
into a bit, right?
Yes, it's something I have been exploring. And actually, I growing up and living in California for so long and working as a nurse very in Watsonville, which was at one point, it might still be to a certain degree. There were many non-English speaking people, most of them from Mexico at the time. And they would bring in all kinds of food that was really healthy, except for the lard. And lard is a big part of how they prepared beans. But beans and rice and plant-based foods are really very healthy for us. And I think the point you made earlier that economically, many people still stick to that diet is a valid one, but it also is a very healthy diet. And I hear people say that eating organic, for example, is more expensive, but it's not if you're actually eating whole food, like beans and lots of greens and rice and legumes and nuts and seeds. So, yeah, hopefully, the other thing I would say is there's more and more scientific evidence that animal products are are the major contributor to heart disease, not
Well,
not salt.
not
That's
just
another.
heart disease, but also climate change. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely.
deforestation for beef is like a huge problem around the world. So one of the coolest things we can think about is like, I know people have that meatless Monday thing,
Mhm.
but meatless month might be a cool idea. Maybe we could try meatless May, because truly people around the world eat meat as a condiment more than as
Right,
a big honking thing on your plate, right? And
right.
that piece, I think that's something to kind of consider. One of the coolest things I've found is like eating with other vegetarians or ovo pescatarians or whatever, that usually the food is fabulous and mostly all handmade or homemade. Reed, what have you got?
Well, I'm thinking about what you just said as a way to look at this because we might feel challenged if we're just starting to eat pescatarian or vegetarian, that we might just reduce that meat, that chicken or turkey to a little sort of addition to the meal, not the centerpiece. And that is a way to sort of think, well, I actually don't, I won't need it as much, but I don't have to give it up. It's not, I mean, I can work in a direction and that lets you feel as though maybe you're still serving a full meal, and you'll find, at least in my experience, that is plenty filling. You do not need to feast on meat
Well, you know
to
me,
Yeah.
feel safe.
whatever I do, I get right in there and do it all the way, right? So I'm like, why not meatless Monday? Why not meatless every day? Why not? Right. But you Read, you're absolutely right that most sane, normal people would take it a little slower than that. And why
Well,
not?
yeah, and I think that's for many of us, that's how we have success. Is if in any kind of change we want to make, is if we take it slow at first, kind of gradually get into that. My very first Meatless Monday experience was in the 70s as a nurse in San Francisco. So I have lots of experience with that. And I think that's really a nice way for people to start is choose one day a week where you're not and you're not going to eat any animal products, because that's really what the science is pushing for now, is for us to in part for our health, because it is a healthier way to eat, but also for the environment. So, and for the animals. It is the reason now that I'm a totally whole food, plant-based eater. I don't say vegan anymore because it's confusing for people. I try not to eat anything that comes out of a package, which is tough sometimes, but that's my goal. But I want to talk about salt because it was one of the things that we thought we would talk about today. And salt's a perfect example of you don't want to give up salt completely. Salt is one of the minerals that's critical for our health. And for especially cardiac health, we need a certain amount of balance of salt and potassium and chloride, a couple of other minerals to keep our hearts beating properly. And but we do eat in this country, I think, too much salt. And as a way of breaking into cutting back on your salt, I would suggest try not to eat any packaged foods. And if you're buying for example, if you buy a can of black beans to make tacos this week for Cinco de Mayo, read the labels. And if there's a lot of salt in it, find one that is salt-free or less salt. And just we've been talking about that for years, and I forget from time to time to read the labels of things too. But it makes sense if you're buying a package of something, read the label and see if it has salt added to it. If it does, it's probably a lot of salt, and you want to maybe rethink your purchase. That's
You
how
know,
I would start.
that's a good point because I was looking at tortillas, and for quite a long time, when I've helped a lot of people with tricky diets, because I think that's kind of fun. It's
Mhm.
inventive. You have to get smart about things, and for a long time, a lot of tortillas did not have any salt.
Right.
And you could say there's if you're really on a super restricted, your bread could be a tortilla. Well, today when I was at the grocery store looking around, I noticed that quite a few of them do have salt now, which they didn't used to.
Yeah.
So that you do really have to double check if it's something that's a concern for you. And even if you don't have a salt sensitivity, it's probably just a really good idea to remember that as we get a little older, certain things get harder for our bodies to flush, right?
Well, yeah, to a point. I did a very small study this morning and asked a gentleman that I know why he was using salt substitute. It's this Morton's salt substitute. And I asked him about it in preparation for this because I was curious about why people would go to this from salt. And it did take me quite a rabbit hole. And the first response from this man was, well, I don't know, I guess I just thought it was a good idea. And I would like to suggest that that's not necessarily true. And then he kind of rethought it and realized that his cardiologist had suggested it. And I would say, having been a nurse for 50 years, lowering your salt has been advice that doctors give for people with high blood pressure. It's on a list of things, and it's up at the top of the list. I think in part because it's easier for us to do sometimes. Um, but I do want to say one thing that, first of all, I want to talk about this before Reed leaves. Um, this salt substitute, and a good number of them, have less salt and they have added potassium. And it gives you the flavor of salt. Potassium is a really important element for our bodies, but you need to be careful with something like this if you have kidney problems, because you can get into a really life-threatening situation with too much potassium. So I think if anybody is thinking about going to a salt substitute versus just cutting back a little on their salt, you need to talk to your doctor, look at your own health issues. I can't speak to everybody's individual issues, but if you've got kidney problems, you don't want something with potassium that you can shake on your food unless you've cleared it with your doctor. And the other thing I learned was that potassium does lower your blood pressure. So eating foods that are rich in potassium instead of salt could help you get to your goal without needing to have a salt substitute that might not be good for you. Does that make sense?
Oh,
Oh,
yes, and we've talked a lot about, in my family, about osteoporosis and, calcium, and the idea of getting calcium out of a pill versus out of your food.
Right, exactly. And this is sort of the same thing. Now, as I said, telling people to lower their salt and or use a salt substitute can be a really easy thing for a doctor to say and for us to do. And I do get it that lots of people are not going to exercise more, which is one of the things that can really help lower your blood pressure. And so I understand that, but you just need to be careful with it and think about the foods that actually have potassium in them, which might help you lower your blood pressure. And generally speaking, unless you're in kidney failure, generally speaking, you're not going to get too much potassium from a food source, in part because the food sources for potassium are not things that you're going to overeat. So foods with potassium would be dried fruit, avocado, apples, bananas, leafy greens, spinach, kale, carrots, potatoes, sweet potatoes,
Yeah.
tomatoes, cucumbers. There's a whole slew of foods.
Okay.
If you were to be eating a well-balanced, very diverse diet, you'd get enough potassium from your food. This-
That's
Yeah.
true. Another kind of cool thing about this is brewer's yeast or
Well,
flaked nutritional yeast, and it has a, for me anyway, it has a very salty flavor, but there's no sodium in it.
no, yeah, and it's a great cheese substitute for some
Mhm.
people,
Exactly.
and it's wonderful sprinkled on your salad. And the other, it's a great substitute for that, for salt. Absolutely. It also has B12. And as we get older, that's one of the things that we do need some help with. And either in a supplement or in our food. And nutritional yeast every day is a great way to begin to get more B12 too. So I agree.
You
So
know, go ahead.
can I take us in just a slightly different direction while
Yeah.
we're talking salt? So then I started thinking, okay, many of us, I can't speak for everybody, but I know for me, I stopped using the regular Morton salt quite a long time ago because it was, for two reasons, mostly because it was so heavily processed that all the minerals in the salt were gone. And so, and from what I was learning, it seemed that we all would benefit from those additional little micronutrients in the minerals. And I was eating fish then. And so I was getting iodine from the seafood. But I realized today that I haven't had fish in a couple years now because the ocean's overfished and also because the fish isn't necessarily all that safe to eat anymore because of the mercury and things. And then I realized I'm not getting any iodine because I'm only eating real salt or sea salt. Um, and so was kind of a dilemma for me. It was like, well, I do know we need some iodine. That's why they started adding iodine to the Morton salt all those years ago, decades ago now. Um, so I think it's just something to consider. I'm not going to go back to Morton salt, but I am going to start eating foods that are higher in iodine. And for me, that would be things from the sea, like seaweed. That's what I'm trying to get at. So something like nori flakes on top of my salad, or you don't need very much iodine, but a little would be good. Yeah.
Well, there's those fun, my grandkids love kelp Krispies,
Uh-huh.
and it's just dried kelp.
Right,
But they're real
exactly.
green and they're super crunchy and there's a nice, salty kind of flavor, but they're not, it's natural. Because the other thing about salt to think about is that sea salt is now, almost always has plastic particles in it, very small. So
Right.
then you're looking at mined salt, right? And again,
Mhm.
there are some sources of mined salt that are not super processed, but they are ground. You don't get the
Right.
big chunk. Um, but it's getting harder and harder to find things that don't have a catch, don't have a
Well,
snag.
yeah, I think that's very true. And this one comes from Utah. So it's mined. It's hard to know how clean it is, but I try not to use a lot of salt anyway, in terms of adding to food recipes. But it's just something to think about if like me, you stopped eating salt with iodine a long time ago, it's probably a good idea to add some seaweed. And I used to put a little inch of combo in the beans and the rice, whatever I was cooking to get that into the food. And I'll just start doing that again too. So, Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes good sense. But the thing is, why do we even use salt? Because we want a little burst, right?
A flavor.
It sparkles in your mouth. It makes things, it boosts flavor. So I always think about citrus and not just, limes. Of course, everybody's like, oh, limes, Cinco de Mayo. And that's
Mhm.
true. But if you look at a lot of Mexican and South American and Central American cooking, they use all kinds of citrus and the juice, the pulp, the rind. And of course, that's only good if it's organic because you don't want
Right.
all the pesticides that are in the rinds of conventional citrus. But one of the best ways for me to like sparkle up a dish is to last minute, right before you serve, do a squeeze of, and it could even be, you know, an orange or a yuzu fruit or, tangerines or whatever you got there. But and adding those to salads and stuff too, the little sections of a small
Hmm.
citrus fruit. It's a
Citrus.
bright spangle in your mouth, but it doesn't need salt, right?
Right. That's true. Well, and most of the spices that are used in recipes for Mexican or Central American food, and actually Indian food, cumin, chilies, smoked paprika, cayenne pepper, all those things add a lot of good taste. And so I think a lot of times it's just almost out of habit we pour salt on. And I do think salt is one of those foods that you probably have to develop a taste for something else. It's going to be a while if you're cutting back or cutting salt out of your recipes to kind of get used to again how food tastes without the salt. So I think that's the challenge for people is it tastes kind of bland without these little extras at first.
Well, and if you look at old cookbooks, like I have a whole collection of like Fanny Farmers of
Uh-huh.
and like in the old maybe 80 years ago, you wouldn't find the same amounts of sugar and salt that you would today by a
Mm.
huge margin or fat. It's like they people were just eating a lot less of the big pump flavors. It's the those are the fat carries flavor, salt perks flavor, right? Sugar boosts flavor and has its own kind of zing. And those, I think we've gotten accustomed to um, a lot of brightness in our food. And so what is like natural and ordinary sometimes doesn't have the same attraction as something that's been boosted. But that's for me where the power of the fresh comes in because, fresh greens actually have a lot of flavor. They
They
really
sure
do.
do. Absolutely. The other thing I would say is that it's 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 not by accident that we're eating more salt and more sugar now than we did, say, when the last Fanny Farmer edition came out. Is it still being published? I don't know that,
I don't
but
know, but mine
you know,
go back almost 100 years.
yeah. Oh, wow. But the food industry, this was part of, I did kind of this deep dive. The food industry works very hard to
Yeah.
get us addicted to the packaged food, and cheese is addictive. And cheese is very salty. And once the cheese is on that pizza, there's even more salt added. And it's to get you hooked on that stronger flavor and then get you to come back, come buy it again, come have more pizza. I mean, pizza is one of the saltiest foods around, I'm quite sure, that is readily eaten by so many people. But yeah, it's not by accident. So you kind of initially, if you're trying to lower your salt, make some changes, it's going to be really hard to go out to eat, I think, because restaurants are the other one. They're really famously salty. So that's going to be a challenge for a while. But I do think that fresh food and prepared at home where you can control the amount of salt. Um, and I also think that for some people, depending on what your heart situation is, you maybe don't need to be go without salt completely. You don't need the salt substitute. You just need to stop eating packaged food, cook at home a little bit more, and really watch what you're sprinkling on your food. And there are so many other healthy options and tasty options. So,
In our conversations, you've often said people don't feel like they don't have time to do slow food, and yet slow food is pretty trendy in some ways, right?
mhm,
People go to restaurants to eat slow food. They could make it home if they had a slow cooker,
that's
right?
right. That's right.
But one of the things I think about that is that there's other cultures don't look at cooking as a chore so much as we do.
No,
And there's
that's
an
right.
enjoyment for me. I mean, this is just the gardener girl, but I'm like, I love chopping ingredients. It's like you look at the beautiful colors of the peppers or the all the variety of salad greens, and they're beautiful, right? And when you cut things, they release some smell. And I'm chopping onions. I'm great. I love that zing of the onion. And there's another thing you can sprinkle some fresh onion over the top of a soup or a
Or,
salsa or anything like that.
or anything. Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
a nice big burst of flavor that gets you it sparkles in your mouth, right? And
Right. Yeah. People do report people who eat more food at home and that they prepared themselves and that that's plant-based. And I would second this. They feel better. And when you start to feel better, then it makes sense that if you're feeling well, you're reaching some goals that you have. It makes sense then to continue doing what you're doing and prepping at home. I had an interesting conversation yesterday with a friend of mine, and I was talking about this is the same person that went to Morocco, and she was talking about the fresh food there. And somehow I was explaining to her that I had decided a long time ago, somehow in the conversation, to make my own almond milk, and it's not that big a deal. And she said, "Oh, it must be so takes so much time, people." And I said, "Well, it doesn't take any time at all when you plan to do it. You get in the groove. It's about a 15-minute process." I thought today, when I made my almond milk this morning, I thought I should film it for her, let her see how easy it
yeah.
is. But I think we have this mindset that planning and cooking at home takes so much time. And really, when you think about it, if you were going to go out to a restaurant, you got to get there, you got to wait to get seated oftentimes, I'm sure on Bainbridge. And then, there's the meal. And yes, it's delightful, but you can create some of that at home. Cinco de Mayo is a perfect example, too. Be really fun to have a Cinco de Mayo party with people and make some plant-based foods, and other people could bring something that isn't plant-based, but there'd be this nice mix of really well-made food prepared at home. And sometimes I think that's really a better party than being in a restaurant anyway. For me now, they're too noisy sometimes, and I can't hear what's being said at the other end of the table.
Well, and expensive. I mean, that's the other
Yeah,
thing. Sticker shock has really
absolutely.
climbed. And so one of the coolest things for me is that I can go into a restaurant with a friend at lunch or something and taste something I really like and kind of pretty much suss it out and go home and make it. Like
Yeah.
if you tune your tasters, you're actually going to go, oh, okay, there's some lemon and garlic and something else. Oh, I think it's coriander. I'll try that. Right? Coriander happens to be one of the herbs that a lot of Mexican food does use, and we
Mhm.
don't use it that much in ordinary cooking, in American cooking. But it's another big flavor booster because it's complex and a little mysterious, and you can put that in a sauce or a mole, and it will be really interesting.
Right. Well, and the leaf is the cilantro, which
Mhm.
is readily used and so fresh, and it's such a great flavor. I've been adding fresh cilantro and have planted it in my salad garden, to my salad. Just a little chop of some leaves in there adds just this wonderful kick of flavor.
Well,
So,
and parsley too. I actually am growing five kinds of parsley, some heritage
right,
Italian parsleys that look different too. They're kind of frillier and stuff. And but they all, I mean, they have the parsley flavor, but they're a little different. And
yeah.
it's fun. Just anything. If you put a tablespoon of fresh chopped herbs in your salad, it will be a much more exciting and interesting salad or an omelet, say, right?
Right. So
Although
tell me,
Growing that is not as challenging as many other things that you might try to be
right?
growing in your garden, right? You can do that easily in a container.
Yeah.
in a
Oh,
container, and actually some this garden guru I've been following for my salad garden suggests that most herbs need good drainage because they come from Mediterranean areas. So a few pots of herbs out on your back deck or in the garden adjacent to your the rest of your food that's growing in containers is exactly right, Reed. It's just the perfect way to grow them too,
you
and it
just
makes
want a
it so
big,
much
big
more
pot.
accessible. Hmm?
You want a really big pot because for two reasons. One is a small pot dries out too fast,
Right.
and as the plant grows, it's usually not as hospitable. But also, we have a plague of rabbits on
Huh?
Bainbridge, and they can nip in and nibble away
Mhm.
at the ask me how I know this, right? You go up and it's like things are plowed down and you're like, that was not a slug. That was something else. And then I saw a rabbit pull itself up and get in there and start noshing. And I'm like,
So,
so I've started using those big tree pots, the 25 and 30-gallon pots that trees
the
come in.
smart move. Yeah.
Whenever gets a tree around here, I go over and scrounge the pot. But those are good for tomatoes. Those are good for peppers. They're good for all sorts of things, and they're generally too high for our little rabbits too,
I
right?
miss those bunnies of Rolling Bay. Oh my goodness. I know. I know. Well, and I have two house cats that were outside cats in Rolling Bay. And so the bunnies don't miss them, believe me.
I bet.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
do miss seeing the bunnies.
we'll talk a little about avocados
Mm.
because
Avocados are super healthy fat. Avocados are one of the foods that give you potassium. So if you're suddenly somebody with a kidney issue, you don't want to eat a ton of avocados, but avocados are I'm sorry, are super good for us. And actually one of the recipes that I wanted to share is I hate to tell you, it does use avocados, but I won't tell you any more about it. But avocados are a great food for us. They're loaded with nutrition. They're a healthy fat, and we do need the healthy fats. They're not considered a saturated fat. So avocado as a fruit, I think it is, and avocado oil is also one of the fats. If you're going to use oil that is safe for you and can take high heat, so
yeah, I use
they're
it a lot because of the high heat. Like you can sear something and get a really kind of great
right.
caramelization out of it without, and for roasting vegetables in the oven,
Mhm.
avocado oil is wonderful. And it actually has, for me, my taste, a pretty buttery quality to it.
I
So like
agree.
when I
Yeah,
make, mashed potatoes, it's got some avocado oil in it, right? And probably some nutritional yeast,
yeah, yeah,
right? And some
yeah.
crushed pepper, and then it has green onions on top, right? And then you have a really healthy version that if you don't tell people,
Well,
they
that's the key. That's the key. Because people have the preconceived notion that it's not, it won't taste as good. I kind of dropped the ball in terms of getting recipes to you. So what I'd like to do, I found this wonderful recipe for sweet potato nachos.
Hmm.
And it's no cheese, nothing. It's a whole food recipe. And I did find also a couple of recipes for two different kinds of taco meat that isn't meat. And so I was hoping maybe I could just share my email address, and if people want the recipes, I'd be glad to send them out to them tomorrow.
Well, easier than that, if you just send him to read, he can attach them to the video of
Oh,
this
good,
talk because
good.
that's what happens. Like when we have them viewed later, we always have something added on, like, oh, they were talking about this book, or they were talking about that, or here's some of the
Oh, good.
recipes.
Okay.
So we
Yeah,
can
no,
do,
I'd be glad to do that. I'll get them onto my desktop and get them off to read by tomorrow morning. Will that work?
oh, sure, yeah, no
Yeah,
hurry.
good. Yeah,
Um, the
good.
other thing that I wanted to talk about was beans, because having traveled some in South and Central America and parts of Mexico, and I'm aware that there are at least 50 kinds of beans that are native to
Wow.
places, and that in Mexico you can buy about 50 kinds of beans not necessarily at a supermarket, but at stores that specialize, and there's lots of those. Just one of we talked a little before the video started about Rancho Gordo because
Good.
that's one
Yeah.
of the great resources. And I have this is my favorite kind. They're Good Mother Stallard, and these beans are amazing. They cook up beautifully, and their broth is you don't need salt or anything, and their broth is so delicious that I've served them to people with really just almost as is with like a little green onions. And people go, oh my God, what did you do to these beans? Because the beans themselves have so much flavor. And I think we're used to, and we've all done it, canned beans are so quick, right? It takes a little more time to remember to soak the beans and cook them overnight. But doing that become, like you said, part of your routine. If you do, I tend to cook maybe once or twice a week, and I'll make two or three things because in my house I might have 2 people or I might have 6 people depending on what's going on. And that varies quite a bit within the week. So I make several things, and that puts all your chopping and so forth into one discrete block of time. But having beans ready, like you said, you have a little jar of beans in your fridge, right?
All the time. Yeah, absolutely. And they go on a salad or they might be mixed in with quinoa or rice or something for a simple, quick meal and then some fresh herbs on top. And yeah, I always have a pot of about every 2 days I make a pot of beans and that'll last for a couple days unless I have company and then not quite.
Right.
But and I think you're absolutely right. It once you get into the routine, it's really not very labor intensive. And over time, you begin to know exactly how long the particular bean takes in your particular pot, in your particular kitchen and altitude, wherever you are. So,
Well, and
yeah,
the thing is, people say, well, that takes so long. And I'm like, you don't actually have to watch them.
that's right.
You can put on a timer. It's okay.
That's right.
You can put them in your slow cooker and they can do their thing by themselves. You soak them overnight or whatever it is, rinse. But because the length of time is long, but that's not the active time. That's the passive
Oh,
time.
I agree. Excuse me 1 minute. I'm kind of breaking up a cat issue. Hey, hey, I'm
These
sorry.
Good Mother Stallard beans, by the way, are also fantastic fresh. And so when you buy Rancho Gordo beans, they're not treated with any of the things that won't let them sprout. So you can sprout these and have them in your garden, which is something I always try to do every year. These are the Good Mother Stallards are so good, like fresh in the pod, the whole pod chopped up into salads and things, or dry the beans, or have the beans fresh, like green beans, right? They're
Do
so
they
good.
come? Do they come with the pod? No.
No, they come just, I don't know if you can see
Yeah.
yeah.
What kind of bean is it actually?
Well, it's a brown bean.
Oh,
It's
it's a
just,
brown bean. Yeah.
Good Mother
I like
Stallard is the variety. It's a heritage form.
Mhm.
But one of the things any good co-op and actually a lot of grocery stores anymore have a lot of choices in their dry, their bulk. And you could look and see they
Absolutely.
have, black turtle beans or 2 kinds of Asian beans. You can get mung beans or, there's lots of different kinds to play around with and try. And if, adding them to salads a little is a good way to kind of introduce yourself to a variety of beans too and see what they're going to do.
Right. And the value of beans is the protein they offer and the fiber they offer, because fiber is one of the other things that in our American diet, we don't get enough of.
Mhm.
And fiber, as we talked about, I think when we talked about the microbiome, fiber feeds all those different bugs down there in your gut that you need to take care of. I like their cranberry beans too from Rancho, but I haven't seen those so much yet in a grocery store. I'll have to keep my eyes out.
Yeah, and there's little co-ops and little those delis and places like that. You can sometimes find heritage beans from all over the world. In Italy, when I used to live in Italy for a while, and there were stores that had 200 kinds of pasta, and there were stores that had 200 kinds of cheese, and there were stores that had 200 kinds of beans and rice. I could not believe it. And here you have like long grain, short grain. Actually, now today there's many more types of
Uh,
rice. You might have jasmine rice or so forth. And even with brown rice, there's like long grain and short grain. And that's another thing I tend to have made up, a pot of
Me
brown
too.
rice, because so many sauces and things go on it. It's
Mhm.
very useful that way.
Right. And those are both foods that are really good for us and also very economical. And they're foods that you can plan ahead and kind of have always available and use them as a stepping off place. I mean, tacos, if you had beans in the fridge, and it could be black beans or kidney beans or any kind of beans, and corn tortillas, please get organic or non-GMO at least. And some rice. You've got the makings of a meal with some spices and a little salsa or some hot sauce. I mean, it's pretty easy and it's economical. And I've had plenty of people talk to me lately about the cost of food now. And so those are great solutions that are really healthy for us and easy to digest.
And the other thing that's worth thinking about is many of us might be cooking for just 1 or 2 people, and it doesn't always seem practical to do. But the thing is, all those things freeze. You can freeze tortillas, you can freeze beans, you can freeze cooked rice, you
Mhm.
can freeze most sauces. Um, so, now salsa, fresh salsa doesn't freeze particularly well. I mean, you can, but it's not going to be very nice when it thaws out. You could throw it in a soup or something like that. But it's a fresh food and it should always be considered that, right? But
Right.
thinking about if you took the your beans and your rice out of the freezer and then toss them together, you could put orange sections and some lime juice, right? And some walnuts or something in there, or pepitas, because I know in Mexico, especially, the squash and pumpkin seeds are really a big part of snacking. And how
Yeah.
healthy is that? Because they're high protein, no sodium, right?
Mhm.
That's a wonderful crunchy snack for people. And you
Right.
don't have to roast. I mean, they're already ready to go, right?
I put them on my salad every night when I have a salad or lunchtime, whichever. And usually sometimes I'll have a handful of them before bed. They're loaded with magnesium, which helps relax all the smooth muscle, so helps with sleep. So yeah, pumpkin seeds especially are one of those foods I always have a jar of too. And don't, they're just raw. You don't have to do anything but get them home, put them in a jar where they'll be safe. Yeah.
And if you buy a bunch, you can freeze those too in small
Yeah.
containers.
Yeah.
And I often will do that because, if you get a bag full, I might not go through that fast, but you can keep them in the fridge or you can freeze some of them and have a
Mhm.
little jar in the fridge or whatever. And then they're always kind of fresh, which is
Yeah,
nice.
I do that too. You're only limited by the size of your freezer. That would be yes. But yeah, I think that we've covered there's so many healthy ways to avoid the extra salt, and I just want to kind of reiterate all those spices that you talked about. Um and I think they're so universal in terms of most um, culinary traditions, except the American diet. And, I guess traditional for us is what? Hamburgers, French fries. I don't know. I
Well,
mean,
if you were going to go really traditional, you'd go all the way back to native people who probably ate the healthiest diet on the planet,
right,
right?
exactly. That's true. That's true. Corn. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, corn and beans and rice are all super compatible.
Right.
There's the whole three sisters thing of squash
Yeah,
and corn, right? And
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that,
exactly.
right, thinking again about fresh foods. But I wanted to say a little about sugar because one of the interesting things that happened last year was that my daughter had some major health issues that resulted in her spending a lot of time at Harborview. And one of the things she asked me, she's like, I'm going to come home and I've spent all this time getting, used to eating very small meals and this no sugar, and her diet is extremely limited at first. Um, so she said, could you just take everything that has sugar in it out of the house?
Mhm.
So I was like,
Hard to do,
sure.
huh?
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, it wasn't actually. I mean, it was really interesting to see, like, did that make a big difference? And, with all the other stuff that was going on, it was the least of it. But we both noticed, like, when it's not around, you're not, it's not just an easy uh, thing to find, then you're not going to snack on that kind of stuff, right? And doing snacking on nuts instead, because that was something that's beneficial, right? Or not snacking at all. But I just thought it was such an interesting experiment that to get rid of everything felt like a cleansing kind of almost, not
Mhm.
like a deprivation. It was like, oh, let's reset. Let's
Yeah,
reset our taste buds and see what it tastes like when, the sweetest thing in our mouth is some apple,
right. Yeah.
a real apple.
A real apple, that's right. Well, I think I would say that you were a little further along the curve in terms of healthy eating to begin with, because a lot of people really do struggle with getting rid of all the sugars in their household. But it is definitely possible, especially if it's not there. And usually, the thing that I start clients out with when I have talked with them about sugar is cane sugar. Cane sugar of all kinds, organic or not, is really deadly for our bodies. Besides the fact that the sugar elevates our blood sugar and is a contributor, not a cause, but a contributor to things like diabetes. But cane sugar is a negative in so many ways for our gut health. And so for somebody out there who's listening to you and saying, "Boy, I don't know if I could get rid of all the sugar," get rid of cane sugar first and anything that has cane sugar in, like ketchup or Some salsas have it added. There's so many things that real cane sugar is added to. And then just experiment with sweetening things like maple syrup, which does give you some nutritional value. And that's a good way for people to go if they're not able to go cold turkey. But I'm so happy for you that you were able to do that and that it was, yes, it was successful.
Well, I'm an extremist, so you know, I dive in pretty deep. But I think also it's not like, my grandkids come over and they have, they use maple syrup and they
Mhm.
make peanut butter cookies with, whatever. But it's just much less and it's less of a constant. And I think that's a piece for a lot of people. Like whatever we grab for with reflexively, should
Mhm.
really look at it.
I
And
agree. Yeah,
right? Like what am I eating, not really noticing or not counting? And
right.
so, they're eating these kelp crispies. That's great, right? It's actually just a piece of kelp, but
Yeah.
it's crunchy and tastes great, right? So, and you can crunch it up and put it in salad. I think you said that. So, just looking at things that have a lot of mouth appeal, but are not actually prepackaged or, older than than the week, right? I
Right.
mean, things that have been sitting around in the store are not really that healthy either necessarily.
Oh, and if you're there's two things I'd like to say about that. First of all, if your big concern in the world is the environment, then you don't want to be eating food that came from halfway around the world, shipped here, and sits on a shelf many places before it gets to you. But the my focus is certainly a piece of that. But for me, more importantly, especially at my age, I want foods that are going to give me something of value, that are going to help give me energy, that are going to protect my brain, that are going to help me take care of my body. And food does that. Food is a great substitute for pharmaceuticals in a lot of situations. I'm not suggesting anybody get rid of the medication they're taking, but what I am saying is that food, when you really begin to understand what food does for us, you'll want more nutrient dense food in your diet. And so, and sugar, cane sugar, in whatever form it comes, I'm not talking about maple syrup or honey, or coconut sugar for that matter, but pure cane sugar takes away from our body. It actually takes some energy to digest it, and it kills bacteria that's positive in our body and feeds the negative stuff. So trying to find foods that are nutrient dense is really important to me now. And it's so easy to do. A big green leafy salad is one of the best things you could eat.
Well, one of the things my grandson said, they were here just this weekend, and his sister was asking for another treat or something, and he said, "If we have too many treats, they're not special anymore."
Mm.
And I thought, for as a culture, because looking back at my old cookbooks, right, and I have more than just Annie Farmer in there, but like for the people living 100 years ago or more, um, things like sugar were a huge treat and rare, and not a common thing that you had every day at all, right?
No.
And so when you did have a, a special something like a feast, it was really made a big difference. But I think we've come as a culture to expect to eat sort of festival food all the time. Like, I
Well,
know perfectly well people who are going to have Cinco de Mayo are not the only time they're going to eat chips and guacamole, and why should it be?
no.
But the point is, we have to think about what's the difference between special and daily. And daily can be absolutely delicious, but it doesn't have to be the uh, what would I say, the extravagant thing or the right over the top thing. But I
Right.
think that's become like we've reset so many times that it's the new normal.
Yeah, because it's so available is part of it. And again, that's marketing. That they're keeping that in the forefront, so we'll see it, so we'll buy it. That's a pretty smart little boy, I would say, your grandson. That
He
that's
is
great observation.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna send these recipes out, and one of them is for Mexican chocolate. And I think you'll be really pleased to see that recipe because it'll be a nice treat for them, and really healthy too. And
Well,
it always surprises
chocolate is an ingredient in a just number of Mexican and South and Central American dishes, and not as a sweetener,
No.
but as like in some of the more complex moles where you have, garlic and onion and maybe pepitas or some peanuts sometimes, and then grinding those things up, and then with dark chocolate mixed into it, it's actually gives this really amazing mysterious flavor that's so good. It's not, but it's we associate chocolate so much with sweetness that we're not used to thinking of it as kind of an enrichment, but it has almost an umami kind of flavor. It's very
It, it does, yeah. I make a chocolate that I have for a snack when I want something, because cacao is really good for us. It's full of phytonutrients that are so healthy. It's a superfood for sure. Um, and I like it really dark chocolate. The darker it is, then the less sweetener there is. And so then, and it does have, it's not terribly sweet. It does have what you're talking about, sort of that umami flavor. And it's delicious. Yeah, I agree with you. And that's one of those things that lots of cultures have done. And then somehow it got adulterated in our culture to be a sweetener and candy. Yeah, I'm in a big grocery store. Probably it's true at Town and Country too. I haven't been there in a while. The number of candy chocolate bars. I mean, there even at Town and Country, I remember there was a whole aisle practically of chocolate bars in various levels of sweetness. But other cultures do use it in different ways. Absolutely. And that's why I think you'll find this Mexican chocolate pudding interesting because it's got cacao in it and it also has a little bit of cayenne pepper, which makes it that Mexican-y flavor. So I'll get that to Reed tomorrow
great.
so
That
that
sounds
he can get it.
wonderful, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah,
Do you
it'd
have
be a great
anything,
Christmas.
any last thing you want to throw in the mix before we sign out?
Well, not necessarily related to Cinco de Mayo, but I'm on a mission to just encourage people to eat as many whole food, plant-based foods as you can and crowd out the animal products. You don't have to stop eating them completely, but the fewer of those you can eat, the healthier you're going to be, and the healthier the planet is going to be. And it's a great way to start young people off eating more vegetables and fruit and nuts and seeds. So I just have a passion about it, and I really want people to think about at least a salad with 7 or more ingredients every day. And I've read recently, and I've heard it spoken a couple times now recently too. Try to get more than at least 30 different plants into your diet a week.
Oh,
That's a
there's an
big
interesting
number.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And for some people, maybe the thing will be to keep a little bit of a food journal for a week and sort of write down, because, when I do a sauce, it probably has 8 or 10 vegetables in it,
absolutely.
right? But, or almost anything. But then are you going to use those same ones over and over, or are you going to bring in another player here and there, right? And
Yes,
stretching
exactly.
yourself out, like some people I think would say 30. I can't even imagine that. But really, you're talking about if it's just plant-based foods, right? That includes the grains and the seeds and the
And
nuts
the
and all
seeds
that
and the
kind of stuff,
nuts,
right?
all that stuff. Yeah, the herbs. Yeah. And actually, if you've been doing the people out there who've been doing my 7 ingredients in a salad for a long time and sharing it at dinner parties and that kind of thing, the information, you've already got 7 ingredients in one salad and you still have, the rest of the week to figure out. It's not that much, but the idea is every different plant brings something else highly nutritious to our bodies.
Right.
And that's the goal is to give your body what it needs to really thrive.
Well, and the
Just
phytonutrients are, we really are just kind of on the edge of exploring what those are all about. And we can't
absolutely.
duplicate many of them. So it's not
No,
something you can take a pill for. You have to actually eat the real food to get
exactly.
the benefit. But the
Right.
good news is it tastes amazing. So why would you
Yeah.
not want to, right?
I agree completely. Maybe next time we can talk a little bit more about those things, the phytonutrients, and maybe what supplements we probably do need to take. But the number is very small, I think. There's just so much good nutrition in food. And we're really lucky. I mean, I think we're actually pretty spoiled. We have access if we can, financially it can be tougher, but we have access to so much good food, especially here on the West Coast. I can't speak to on the other side of the Rockies, but and we have the ability to grow food. And I'm so excited now about my salad garden and my herbs, and I'm really having fun with that. So
Oh, I'm so glad you're going to do that. And yeah, you'll find too, like when you start looking around, there's some wonderful resources for for specifically Pacific Northwest gardens because we have
yes,
the most benign growing season really of just about anywhere. Most years. This year, I got to say, it got pretty darn cold for a while there. But having a little cloche or a little teeny tiny, not necessarily heated, but a little greenhouse or sunroom, you can bring stuff in for a few days or a week and then keep it going. You can have something to pick fresh every single day here.
yeah, that's going to be my goal now that I'm starting fresh with raised beds. So I've got the soil going. And my goal is to have something that so that I don't have to go to the store for greens at least or other vegetables, except maybe once in a month for some of the, more beans and those things. Um, what's also really interesting is that every little microclimate is different.
Mhm.
And so now I was in Rolling Bay for 12 years. Now I'm learning about a whole new climate, colder, snowier, all those things. So, and I'm enjoying it. It's really it's a great challenge,
Oh,
something
that's
new to
wonderful.
learn. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll tune back in and talk more about some of these wonderful things another time.
Okay,
But
that's great.
very much appreciated. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you for inviting me. I love being here. Bye bye, Anne.
So long.